you read this letter? It's important.
Can you read this letter? It's important. Those were the very first words the little girl spoke as she stood soaked, shivering at the lobby of Landmark Tower in downtown Atlanta. Her voice trembled, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something older, something that should never belong to a child. She couldn't have been more than 6, skin the color of deep bronze, curls clinging to her forehead from the rain, and the kind of eyes that seemed to carry a lifetime of stories. She clutched a crumpled envelope with both hands like it was the last thing she had in the world. Security looked uncomfortable. Receptionists exchanged glances. A few bystanders scoffed quietly under their breath. Someone muttered, probably another sob story looking for money. But then something strange happened. The CEO of the entire building, Landon McCarter, stepped out of the elevator. A man known for his coldness, precision, and zero tolerance for distractions. He was already mid-conversation on his Bluetooth when he saw her. His steps slowed, his voice faltered. And then, he stopped. Because on that envelope, in faded blue ink, was a name he hadn't seen in over 7 years. Azariah Bell. Landon's face turned pale. He reached for the letter without a word. The little girl didn't pull back. She simply looked up at him, her eyes locked on his. And in that exact moment, time froze. She had her eyes. This was more than a letter. This was the return of a past he thought was buried. This was a reckoning. The next few minutes played out like a scene from a movie. The girl, her name was Serafina, was quietly led upstairs to the executive floor. Not a single word was spoken between them in the elevator. Not until they reached the glass office at the top. He opened the letter. And with each line he read, his hands shook, his lips trembled. The letter was from Azariah, yes, that Azariah. The black waitress he once loved. The woman his family forced him to abandon. The woman whose name he tried to forget, but never could. And this little girl? She was his daughter. This is not just another emotional video. This is a black story, raw, real, and rarely told. It's about generational wounds, about dignity denied and reclaimed. It's about the daughter of a black waitress making a billionaire CEO cry not out of guilt, but out of something far deeper. At Hidden Worth, we don't just tell stories. We uncover the ones buried under silence and shame. Stories like this. Stories that remind us who we are and who we could be. So if you're here, watching this now, take a moment, not just to listen, but to feel, because sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest truths. And if this story moves you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, comment, subscribe. Let people know that some stories deserve to be seen, not because they're perfect, but because they're real. Let's begin. Years before Serafina ever stepped foot in that corporate lobby, before her tiny hands clutched a wrinkled envelope soaked in Georgia rain, there was a time when Landon McCarter and Azariah Bell were just 2 people in a city too big to care. It was the summer of 2016. Landon was already rising fast, an Ivy League graduate with a taste for precision and a mind wired for billion-dollar ideas. His tech startup had just landed its first major round of funding, and investors were throwing checks at him like confetti. Everything about his world was sleek, sharp, and whitewashed, just like the boardrooms he dominated. Azariah, on the other hand, was working nights at a rooftop restaurant in Midtown Atlanta. She had dreams of becoming a writer, maybe a professor someday. But life hadn't gone easy on her. After losing her mother at 17 and raising her little brother while juggling 2 jobs, college felt like a dream she wasn't allowed to keep. But then one night, Landon walked into her section. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't barking orders into a phone. He was just a guy with tired eyes and a whiskey on the rocks, sitting alone at a table for 2. Azariah approached with that quiet confidence that came from knowing how to read a room, not flirtatious, not distant, just real. "You look like someone who hasn't smiled in a while," she said, setting down his drink. Landon looked up, caught off guard, and then, for the first time that week, he smiled. That was how it began. Over the next 6 months, they became something neither of them expected. He brought her books, she brought him perspective. He showed her the glittering city from the top floors of high-rises. She showed him how to dance barefoot in the park at midnight. He loved her mind, her laugh, her refusal to let the world harden her. She loved that he listened, not just with his ears, but with his soul. But there was always a shadow. Azariah was black, Landon was not, and in a city like Atlanta, that still meant something to some people, especially his people. He never told his family about her, not really. His mother, a sharp-tongued socialite with a long memory and a longer list of expectations, had made her views clear since he was a teenager. No distractions, no scandals, and for God's sake, Landon, no charity projects. Azariah was not a project, but to them, she would always be less than. Still, he believed he could protect what they had. That love would somehow be enough. Then Azariah found out she was pregnant. It wasn't planned. It wasn't part of the perfect roadmap either of them had laid out. But it was real. And when she told Landon, she did it with hope in her eyes. "I know this is big," she whispered, holding his hand across the table at their favorite late-night diner. "But I want to do this with you. All the way." Landon squeezed her hand. "Then we do it, together." And for a while, he meant it. He even started looking at homes, talked to a lawyer about stepping back from his company for a few months. He was ready to turn the page and start a new chapter with Azariah and their child. But then the letter came. Not from Azariah, from his mother. It wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration. If Landon didn't end the relationship, he'd lose everything. The company, the funding, even access to the family trust that backed half his ventures. She had connections, and she wasn't bluffing. "Do not bring shame into this family," she warned. "End it, now." Landon tried to resist. For 3 days, he disappeared. Azariah called, texted, left voicemails, no answer. On the 4th day, he finally showed up at her apartment. He didn't say much, just stood there, broken, eyes red, hands shaking. He couldn't even look her in the face when he said, "I can't do this. I'm sorry." Then he left. Azariah never begged. She watched him go, tears streaming down her face, then closed the door and locked it from the inside. That was the last time she saw him. He never read her last message. And he never knew that a few weeks later, she wrote him a letter, folded it with trembling hands, sealed it, and tucked it away in a box of memories she thought she'd never open again. Until Serafina found it. Azariah Bell never looked back, not because it didn't hurt but because she couldn't afford to. The day Landon walked out, she didn't collapse. She didn't scream or curse the world. She simply stood there, placed a trembling hand on her belly, and whispered, "We're going to be okay." And somehow, they were. Azariah gave birth to Serafina in a modest birthing center just outside Decatur. No flowers, no visitors, no father pacing nervously in the hallway. Just her, a midwife, and the kind of pain that broke more than just her body, it cracked her soul. But when they placed Serafina on her chest, skin to skin, eyes wide open, and searching, Azariah knew. She knew this little girl was the reason she had survived everything. The job losses, the loneliness, the shame that wasn't hers to carry but had been forced on her anyway. She named her Serafina, meaning fiery one. And fiery she was. From the time she could crawl, Serafina was full of light. She had Azariah's laugh, but not her sadness. Her curls bounced with every step, and she carried an unshakable curiosity that got her into everything: books, bugs, conversations with strangers. There was a sparkle in her that the world tried, but failed, to dim. Still, life wasn't easy. Azariah worked double shifts, first as a receptionist at a dental office, then as a night janitor in a school. She never once complained, not even when her feet swelled, or when her hands cracked from bleach in cold weather. She just kept going, because Serafina deserved more. Every evening, before her second job, she'd cook dinner, braid Serafina's hair, and read one chapter of whatever library book her daughter picked that week. It was their ritual, their anchor. But no matter how much love Azariah poured into her, the world outside didn't always return it. By the time Serafina turned 6, she had started to ask questions. "Mom, why don't I have a dad like the other kids?" Azariah's chest tightened every time, but she never lied. "Your dad and I, we loved each other once. But life pulled us apart. That doesn't mean you're not loved. Does he know I exist?" Another pause. "No, baby, he doesn't. but maybe someday he will. At school, things were harder. Kids can be cruel, especially when they repeat what they hear at home. Serafina had been called names, some about her skin, some about the fact that her backpack was second-hand, others about not having a dad at career day. Azariah would hold her after those days, rub her back, and say, "You're not broken, you're not less, you're a belle. That means beautiful and strong." Serafina would nod. She always nodded. But deep down, something stayed with her, an ache, a whisper of absence she couldn't explain. Then one rainy Sunday, while helping her mom clean the hallway closet, Serafina found a box she had never seen before. Inside, old photos, a dried flower, a folded piece of paper sealed in an envelope. "Mom, what's this?" Azariah froze. She sat on the carpet, held the letter in her hands like it was radioactive. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she looked up at her daughter, her spitting image, and said, "It's a letter I wrote to your father. I never sent it. I didn't think he cared." Serafina didn't speak. She just looked at the envelope. Then, very softly, "Can I take it to him?" Azariah blinked. "Sweetheart, I don't even know if he's still around. Can we check?" Azariah didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But Serafina's eyes, those big, determined eyes, wouldn't let her say no. So they searched. Google helped. Landon's name wasn't hard to find. CEO of a tech company, face in Forbes, net worth in the billions. It hit Azariah like a freight train. He had built an empire, without ever knowing he had a daughter. They printed the address of his office building. Serafina tucked the letter into her tiny backpack. The next morning, Azariah walked her to the MARTA bus stop. It was still raining. She knelt down, fixed her daughter's hood, and said, "If you do this, don't expect anything, okay? He may not believe you, he may not care." Serafina nodded, then reached up, wiped a tear from her mother's cheek. "He might not, but I do." Azariah didn't stop her. Somewhere deep down, she hoped the man she once loved still had a soul. And if not, maybe the daughter he never knew could help him find it. Landon McCarter was not a man easily shaken. He had weathered billion-dollar negotiations, lawsuits, PR crises, and hostile takeovers without breaking a sweat. His office was a fortress of glass and steel, perched on the 49th floor of Landmark Tower, with a panoramic view of Atlanta's skyline. Everything about him, from his tailored suits to his calendar booked 3 months in advance, screamed control. But that letter? That wrinkled, rain-soaked letter written in soft blue ink? It shook him. The moment he closed the door to his office, Landon sat down and opened it slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable. Still neat. Still graceful. He didn't need to see the signature. He knew. Azariah. As he read, something inside him unraveled. The letter wasn't bitter. It wasn't even angry. It was honest, gentle. She wrote about their time together like it was something sacred, not a wound. She told him about Serafina, her birth, her laugh, her fire. She didn't ask for money. She didn't demand a thing. She just wrote, "If you are reading this, it means our daughter found you." I told her to try. I told her maybe, just maybe, the boy I once knew is still inside the man you've become. Landon sat motionless for minutes, maybe more. Outside, the city hummed along like nothing had changed, but everything had. He turned toward the glass wall and looked down at the street. Somewhere below, Serafina was waiting. Or maybe she had already left. A little girl he had never met. A daughter. His daughter. He could barely breathe. Flashes of Azariah came flooding back, the way she tilted her head when she was trying not to laugh. The way her voice got quiet when she was scared but trying to be brave. The scent of vanilla and lavender that lingered on her skin after a double shift at the restaurant. And then, the memory he hated most. The look on her face the day he left. He hadn't planned to walk out. He really hadn't. But fear has a voice of its own, and his mother's voice had drowned out everything. She had threatened to bury him financially, socially, legally. A child with her, she had spat, will ruin everything. Landon had chosen silence over courage. And now, here he was. He stood up abruptly and walked to the private restroom adjoining his office. The man in the mirror looked the same, clean-cut, successful, but something in his eyes was cracked. He splashed cold water on his face. His hands were shaking. He hadn't cried in over a decade. But now, the tears came like a wave, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, unrelenting grief, for the woman he abandoned, for the daughter he never knew, for the time he could never get back. Minutes later, he returned to his desk and buzzed his assistant. "Find the girl who dropped this off, the little girl. Her name is Serafina. She was here earlier." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "Sir, she left about 30 minutes ago. Took the elevator alone. Security assumed she was lost." "Find her," Landon said again, this time lower. "Firmer, please." He pulled out his phone and typed Azariah's name into the search bar. He hadn't looked her up in years. What would he even find? A few social media posts, an old blog she hadn't updated in forever. But then one photo stopped him. Azariah and Serafina at a local community event. The little girl holding a handmade sign that read, "My mommy is my hero." Landon's heart broke all over again. He didn't know what he was supposed to do. Call her? Apologize? Could words even matter after this much time? He didn't know. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to disappear again. For the first time in years, Landon canceled every meeting on his calendar, cleared his entire week, told his board assistant he was dealing with a family emergency. Because that's what this was. Not a scandal, not a disruption, not a problem to fix. Family. He pulled out a notepad, the one he used for scribbling down billion-dollar strategies, and wrote 5 words in all caps at the top. "Find her, fix this, now." He stared at those words for a long moment. And for the first time in years, Landon McCarter wasn't the CEO. He was just a man who broke something that mattered. And he was ready to fight like hell to make it right. The McCarter family estate sat just outside of Buckhead, Atlanta's wealthy enclave where manicured lawns and iron gates masked generations of secrets. It was the kind of place where tradition meant control, and legacy meant bloodlines clean, curated, and never questioned. Landon hadn't been there in nearly 2 years. Not since the last board meeting turned into a shouting match with his mother over whether or not diversity hires would dilute the company culture. But now, as he pulled into the circular driveway in his black Escalade, the past didn't just knock, it pounded. He stepped out slowly, holding Serafina's hand. She looked up at the towering house with a mix of awe and confusion. Her little backpack, pink with unicorns, looked wildly out of place next to the marble pillars and antique lion statues. Inside, the house smelled the same. Leather, old money, and the faintest scent of rose oil his mother always wore. Margaret McCarter was waiting in the parlor. Still elegant, still cold. Her hair, once fiery red, had faded to a pristine silver bob. She wore pearls, not the trendy kind, but the heavy, inherited kind, and a cream silk blouse that probably cost more than most people's rent. "Landon," she said, standing up but not stepping forward. Her eyes dropped to Serafina, then back up. "What is this?" Landon didn't hesitate. "This is my daughter." There was a pause, a heavy one. Margaret tilted her head ever so slightly, the way she used to when sizing up business rivals. "That child cannot be yours." Serafina squeezed Landon's hand, not quite understanding, but sensing enough. "She's mine," Landon said firmly. "Her name is Serafina. She's 6 years old. Azariah Bell is her mother." That name landed like a slap. Margaret's lips tightened. Her knuckles whitened as she clasped her hands in front of her. "I thought we were done with that chapter," she said, the word "that" soaked in disgust. Landon stepped closer. "You made me believe loving her would ruin my life. You threatened to cut me off, to destroy everything I'd built. So I walked away." "You made a choice," Margaret snapped. "No, I was scared, and I let you scare me." Serafina looked up at her dad again, eyes wide. Landon knelt down to meet her level. "It's okay, sweetheart. Go sit in the hallway for a minute, all right? I just need to talk to Grandma." Serafina nodded slowly and walked out, her sneakers making soft squeaks on the polished marble floor. When she was gone, Landon turned back. "She came to my building, Mom, alone, in the rain, with a letter. From Azariah, a letter I never received. She found me, because you made sure I didn't find them." Margaret's face was unreadable. "I protected you," she said quietly, "from making the biggest mistake of your life. That woman was never going to fit into this world. You had a future, an empire, and you were going to throw it away for a waitress." "Her name is Azariah," Landon snapped, louder now. "She's a brilliant, strong, extraordinary woman, and you destroyed the only chance I had to build a real life. She would have dragged you down." "No, you dragged me down. You made me think love was weakness. That family only matters if it's the right color, the right pedigree, the right photo on the mantle." There was silence again. Margaret turned away, walking slowly to the fireplace where old family portraits lined the mantel. Landon's high school graduation, his father in military uniform, the framed legacy of whiteness and power. She stared for a moment, then said softly, "You don't know what it was like. Growing up when I did. Everything we had could be taken in a moment. If you stepped out of line, I kept us clean, proper, untouchable." Landon stepped beside her. "And in doing that, you made us hollow." He pulled a photo from his jacket pocket. It was of Serafina, grinning wildly as she held up her first library card. Landon handed it to her. "She's brilliant, Mom. Funny, brave. She's your granddaughter, whether you like it or not." Margaret took the photo with trembling fingers. Her lips parted slightly. Her eyes, for once, looked unsure. "I'm not asking you to accept this. I'm telling you, this is happening. She's in my life, and she's staying. I wanted you to meet her, but if you can't see past the skin she's in, then you won't be in our lives at all." It was the first time Landon had ever drawn that line, and he didn't blink when he did. He turned, ready to leave. But just as he reached the hallway, Margaret's voice stopped him. "What's her favorite color?" Landon turned slowly. "Purple." Margaret nodded once. "Mine too." She said nothing else. But as Landon opened the door and reached for Serafina's hand, he saw something in his mother's eyes he hadn't seen in decades. A crack in the armor. Maybe small, but real. Landon McCarter wasn't a man who left things unresolved, especially not now. Once he'd met Serafina, spent even a single hour with her, he was struck by an almost eerie sense of familiarity. The way she tilted her head when she was curious, the way her brow furrowed in deep thought, it was like looking into a mirror of his younger self. He didn't need proof. He felt it in his bones. But the world doesn't run on feelings. It runs on facts. So when his legal advisor suggested a paternity test, just to be thorough, he'd said Landon didn't argue. He agreed. Not for his sake, but to silence any future questions, any whispers from the media, the board, or his mother. Azariah wasn't thrilled about it. She never once tried to demand anything from Landon. She hadn't even asked him to be part of Serafina's life just to know she existed. But she agreed to the test for Serafina's sake. So one quiet Wednesday morning, Landon took his daughter to a private clinic in Midtown. No press, no drama, just cotton swabs, a quiet waiting room, and a promise. "Whatever this says," Landon told Serafina as she swung her legs from the exam table, "nothing changes how I feel." She nodded. "I already know you're my dad." Landon smiled, his chest tightening. 3 days later, the results arrived. He opened the envelope with a trembling hand, sitting alone in his home office. The pages rustled as he unfolded them, reading line by line, until his eyes landed on one phrase that stopped everything. Probability of paternity, 0%. He read it again. Then again. It didn't change. The words were printed in black and white, clinical and cold. The kind of sentence that didn't just answer a question, it erased a reality. Landon sat in silence, numb. Could this be a mistake? Was there a mix-up? Or had Azariah lied? Had he been played? The thought burned like acid in his stomach. He called Azariah. She didn't answer. He didn't leave a message. He didn't know what to say. The next day, Landon canceled all his meetings. He couldn't think, couldn't focus. His mind replayed every interaction, every smile, every word. Was it all a setup? Was she just trying to tie herself to his fortune? But then he remembered Serafina. How could a child fake something so raw? The quiet strength, the familiar stubbornness, the way she looked at the world with both wonder and wariness. He needed answers. That night, as he sat staring at the test results for the 10th time, his phone buzzed. It was a text. From Serafina. It was a photo she had drawn: stick figures, lopsided smiles, a man in a suit, a woman with big hair, and a little girl holding both their hands. Underneath it, she had written in big purple letters, "Family means you never leave again." Landon closed his eyes. His throat tightened, his heart cracked wider than it had in years. No scam artist teaches a child to love like that. Something didn't add up. He grabbed his phone and called the clinic directly. "I need to speak to the lab technician, the one who processed the paternity test for McCarter, urgently." The receptionist hesitated. "Sir, the technician assigned to your case is no longer with the clinic." "Then give me their supervisor." After several redirected calls, Landon finally reached a man named Dr. Thomas Green, head of lab services. He explained the situation, the test, the results, the confusion. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Dr. Green spoke, cautiously. "Mr. McCarter, if I may ask, who referred you to our clinic?" Landon blinked. "It was a recommendation from my mother's attorney. She said you were discreet." More silence. "Sir, would you be willing to let us retest independently, privately, just between us?" Landon agreed. 2 days later, he and Serafina went back under a different name, with full legal confidentiality. New samples, new chain of custody, no third-party interference. This time, Landon didn't pace. He didn't overthink. He just waited. When the second set of results arrived, Landon opened them with slow, steady hands. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just let out a long, shaking breath and whispered, "I knew it." He texted Azariah, "We need to talk. I found the truth. I'm not going anywhere." He looked at Serafina's drawing again, that wobbly line connecting their hands. For the first time in a long time, Landon believed in something stronger than blood or numbers. He believed in that line. And now, he was ready to protect it at any cost. The truth had a sound. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, cold. The soft click of Landon's front door closing as he stepped back into his house with the real DNA results in hand. For a few minutes, he just stood there. The weight of what he had discovered settled deep in his chest like a storm that had finally landed. He had been lied to. Not by Azariah. Not by Serafina. But by someone who had always claimed to be protecting him. His mother, Margaret McCarter. He should have seen it coming. The signs were there. The old family lawyer recommending that specific clinic. His mother's sudden approval of getting tested, after years of pretending Azariah didn't exist. And now, a test result that was not only false but deliberate. It wasn't just sabotage. It was manipulation. Landon didn't need more evidence. But something in him needed closure. He needed to hear it from someone else, someone who knew the game his mother had played. So he made a call. The number was old, but still active. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Hello? Stephen, it's Landon." There was a pause. Then, "Didn't think I'd ever hear from you again." Stephen Hayes had been the McCarter family's personal assistant for nearly 15 years before abruptly retiring. No announcement, no party. Landon always thought it was odd. Now he understood. "I need to ask you something," Landon said, "and I need you to tell me the truth. I left that life to get away from the truth, man." "Stephen, please." Another pause, then a sigh. "What do you want to know? Did my mother tamper with the DNA test? Did she arrange to have it faked?" There was no hesitation. "Yes." The word landed like a punch. Stephen continued, voice lower now. "She paid someone at the clinic, said it was necessary, that you were walking into a trap, said the girl would bankrupt you, that Azariah would ruin your name." Landon clenched his jaw. "And you went along with it?" "At first, yeah," Stephen admitted. "I didn't question her. She's a force of nature, you know that. But when I saw the way she smiled after that envelope came back negative, that's when I knew I was done." Landon sat down slowly. "She lied to me. She lied to a little girl." "She lies to stay in control," Stephen said. "Always has." They sat in silence for a beat. Then Stephen added, almost softly, "She's scared of your daughter, not because of who she is, but because of what she represents. Change, truth, and you choosing your own life instead of hers." Landon closed his eyes. This wasn't just about a test. It was about legacy, power, and fear. He thanked Stephen, ended the call, and sat alone for a long while. When he finally stood, he knew what he had to do. The next morning, he drove back to the estate. This time, he didn't bring Serafina. This wasn't her fight. Margaret was in the garden, pruning roses like nothing had happened. Her movements were precise, controlled. Every snip of the shears was calculated. "You faked the test," Landon said, voice flat. She didn't look up. "I did what I had to do. You manipulated me. You made me doubt my own child." Now she looked up. "I protected you, Landon, from a mistake you don't even realize you're making." "A mistake?" he snapped. "Serafina is not a mistake. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. And Azariah is the only woman I've ever truly loved. She is beneath you." "No," he said firmly. "She is beyond you." The words hit hard. Margaret's face tightened, but she said nothing. Landon pulled out the real DNA results, folded neatly. "I had it retested, independently, no lawyers, no clinics you could reach." He placed the envelope on the garden table beside her shears. "She's mine, and she always was." Margaret's hand trembled slightly. Landon didn't wait for her to respond. "I'm done letting you steer my life. You taught me to value power over people, to hide feelings behind titles, but that ends now." He turned to leave, then paused. "You can choose, Mom. You can either be part of this family with all of us, or you can keep living behind gates and lies. But you don't get to control me anymore." He left without another word. Back in the car, he exhaled. It wasn't rage he felt. It was freedom. Back home, Serafina was drawing again. When he walked in, she ran to him like nothing had happened. He picked her up, hugged her tight, and whispered, "It's over, baby. We're whole now." She looked up, confused. "Did Grandma say sorry?" He smiled. "No, but I stopped waiting for her to." And for the first time in a very long time, Landon felt whole too. Azariah Bell hadn't been sleeping. Even after 6 years of doing it all alone, late nights, double shifts, sick days without paid leave, something about the past few days had hit her differently, deeper. Since Serafina's visit to the office tower, the silence had been too loud, and now, no messages, no calls, nothing. Not even a text from Landon. Part of her had always known this might happen. That Serafina's innocence would be met with walls too high, too hard. She'd tried to protect her daughter from that. But Serafina had insisted, and Azariah couldn't kill hope not in a child who'd done nothing but love a man she never knew. That morning, the migraine hit her like a freight train. At first, she thought it was just exhaustion, but then came the dizziness, the chest tightness, and when her vision blurred while reaching for Serafina's cereal bowl, she knew something was wrong. The neighbor found her collapsed on the kitchen floor, Serafina crying beside her, clutching her mom's hand and screaming for help. When Landon got the call, his number listed as the emergency contact Serafina had memorized, he didn't ask questions. He didn't call a driver. He drove himself, straight to the emergency room. By the time he arrived, Serafina was in the waiting area, her face red, clinging to a teddy bear, sitting beside a nurse who looked more concerned with her tablet than the child beside her. Landon walked straight over and dropped to his knees. "Hey," he said softly. "I'm here." Serafina threw her arms around his neck, sobbing into his collar. She wouldn't wake up, she said her head hurt. She fell. "Daddy. Daddy?" The word was like lightning and thunder all at once. He kissed the top of her head, held her tight, and whispered, "She's gonna be okay. I promise." When he asked for information, the nurse hesitated. Standard protocol, family only. But the moment he said, "Father," and Serafina confirmed it with a nod and a death grip on his hand, the walls fell. Azariah was stable, dehydrated, blood pressure too high, exhaustion. Nothing fatal, thank God, but serious enough that the doctor said she had likely been pushing herself too hard for too long. When they finally let him into her room, Landon hesitated at the door. Azariah was sitting up in bed, hair messy, IV in her arm, eyes tired but still impossibly fierce. She looked up, and their eyes met. For a few seconds, neither said anything. Then Azariah exhaled, like all the oxygen had been stuck in her chest. "I guess this is what it takes to get a visit from you," she said dryly. Landon chuckled, stepping inside. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" she asked. "For the past week or the past 7 years?" "Both." He moved to the chair beside her bed. "I got the real DNA results," he said quietly. "You were right. I was her father the whole time." Azariah looked away. "I didn't need a test to know that." "I know," he said, "but I did, because someone close to me made sure I doubted it. And you." Her eyes flicked back to his. "My mother tampered with the first test, paid someone off. I confronted her. I've cut her off." Azariah blinked. "You cut off your own mother?" "I've already lost 6 years," he said. "I'm not losing another minute for someone who doesn't know how to love people who don't look like her." Azariah studied him. The lines on his face were different now, softer. He looked like a man who had cracked wide open and survived it. "I don't need your guilt," she said. "I'm not offering it," he replied. "I'm offering a future. One that's messy, honest, and late, but real." She shook her head slightly, more from disbelief than disagreement. "And what if Serafina gets hurt again? What if you walk away next time it gets hard?" "I won't," he said. "Because this time, I'm not afraid of hard. I'm afraid of empty." Azariah didn't cry, but her silence said everything. He stood up. "If you'll let me," he said, "I want to be there for both of you. Not to fix anything, just to be there, for real. Every birthday, every broken tooth, every dance recital." She finally smiled, faint but real. "You're gonna have to learn how to braid hair," she warned. "I've been watching YouTube videos," he replied. She laughed. And just like that, the past loosened its grip. He sat back down, took her hand gently in his. Serafina peeked around the door, nurse trailing behind her. Azariah opened her arms, and her daughter ran in like a wave crashing into shore. Landon watched them for a long moment, and whispered, almost to himself, "We're home." 2 weeks had passed since Azariah was released from the hospital. Landon didn't waste a second. Every day, he showed up, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with nothing more than his presence, and every day, he stayed a little longer. Azariah didn't make it easy. She had spent too many years doing it all alone to suddenly let someone else step in. But slowly, quietly, she let the walls down, not all at once but piece by piece. Serafina, though, she didn't hold back. She acted like he had always been there, like she had just been waiting for the universe to catch up. One night, after tucking Serafina into bed and reading her favorite story for the 5th time, Landon stepped out onto Azariah's porch. The air was warm, thick with Georgia humidity, but his thoughts were clear. There were things still unfinished. One of them was his will. He hadn't thought about it in years, just signed whatever his attorneys told him to. But now he had someone who deserved more than financial security. She deserved protection. Real protection. The next morning, he called his estate lawyer, a stern man named Raymond Wilkes who rarely blinked and never made small talk. "I want to rewrite everything," Landon said, "from scratch." There was silence on the other end. "I'm listening." The next hour was a whirlwind. Landon made Azariah his medical proxy. He created a trust fund for Serafina, with full access to his educational benefits, healthcare, and guardianship rights. But that wasn't all. "I want to include a clause," Landon said, "that if anything happens to me, anything the company board cannot interfere with her inheritance. No contests, no restrictions." Raymond scribbled notes. "And Margaret McCarter?" Landon didn't hesitate. "She gets nothing." Raymond raised an eyebrow but said nothing. That afternoon, the new documents were drafted, signed, and notarized. By evening, Landon drove to Azariah's apartment and handed her the envelope. She opened it carefully, scanning the legal pages. Her eyes widened as she read. "Landon, this is..." I want you to know, he said quietly, that this isn't just about money. This is about responsibility. About making sure that if anything ever takes me away again, it's not fear. It's not lawyers. It's not people like my mother. Azariah held the papers in her hands, her fingers trembling just slightly. I never asked for this, she said. I know, that's why I trust you with it. She looked at him, eyes soft. You sure about all this? Serafina is mine, he said. And you were always supposed to be part of my life. I just didn't have the backbone to fight for it before. She didn't respond right away. But she didn't hand the envelope back either. And in her silence, he found peace. Later that night, after Serafina had fallen asleep, Azariah joined Landon on the couch. She rested her head on his shoulder and said, It's not the will that proves you're different now. It's how you show up. That's what she'll remember. He nodded. She's the legacy I want to leave. Not a company, not a fortune. Her. Outside, the streetlight flickered. Inside, 3 hearts beat in rhythm. And for the first time in a long, long time, Landon McCarter felt like a man whose future was finally worth protecting. It was supposed to be just a follow-up appointment. Nothing serious. Routine checkup. A few labs, some updates to Azariah's chart, and a doctor's reminder to get more rest, as if rest was ever a luxury she could afford. Serafina was coloring in the waiting room, headphones on, humming softly to a tune only she could hear. Landon sat beside Azariah in the hospital room, watching her flip through a health pamphlet she wasn't really reading. You nervous? He asked. She shrugged. Not really. I feel okay. He smiled, watching her. Even in a hospital gown, with her hair pulled into a loose bun and no makeup, she looked more radiant than anyone he had ever known. She was alive. Here. And that was everything. The doctor came and went with good news, blood pressure normalizing, labs looking good. He gave her the green light to slowly return to work, though Landon was already planning to convince her otherwise. Rest, the doctor said one last time, is not a suggestion. Azariah rolled her eyes as he left. Once they were alone again, Landon reached for her hand. I've been thinking, he said. Uh-oh, she teased. That usually means something expensive. He laughed. Not expensive, just important. She looked at him, sensing the shift in his tone. He stood up, walked over to his coat draped across the chair, and pulled out a small velvet box. Azariah's heart stopped. No way, she whispered. But Landon didn't say anything. Not yet. He sat back down, turning to face her, holding the box in his palm like it was made of glass. I spent years building a life that looked good on paper, he began. Nice suits, big office, fancy dinners. But none of it felt like home. None of it felt like anything. Until I saw you again. Azariah blinked, her eyes already welling up. I was a coward, he continued. I let people talk me out of the best thing that ever happened to me. And then I let 6 years go by, believing a lie. But you, Azariah, you didn't just raise our daughter. You gave her joy. You gave her strength. You gave her love. I didn't even know I was capable of. She opened her mouth, but he stopped her with a look. I know this isn't the fairy tale version. We didn't do things the right way. But maybe that's exactly why it matters. Because life is messy, and we survived it. Together. He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. A thin gold band with a single diamond classic. Timeless, no frills. Just like her. Azariah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Marry me, Landon said, his voice cracking just a little. Not because we have to, not because of Serafina, but because I don't want to spend another day wondering what it would feel like to wake up next to you forever. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she smiled through them. You know I don't care about rings or titles, she whispered. I know, he replied. That's what makes me want to give you both. For a moment, the world slowed. The hospital room faded. And it was just them. Azariah reached for his hand, then the box. She touched the ring, then looked up at him. Yes, she said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was everything. Outside the door, Serafina peeked in, having heard just enough. You said yes? She asked, wide-eyed. Azariah laughed. Yes, baby, I said yes. Serafina burst into the room like a firecracker, jumping into Landon's arms. I knew it. I knew it. Now we're a real family. Landon held her tight, tears in his eyes. You were always a real family, he said. Now we're just official. Azariah smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. And as the sun dipped behind the hospital window, casting golden light across the room, something beautiful happened. No grand venue, no fancy music. Just 3 people. 1 promise. And a love that finally came full circle. Serafina had always been different. Not just because of her bright eyes or the wild curls she refused to tame, but because she carried a kind of quiet wisdom most adults never reach. Still, the world she was growing up in didn't always treat different with kindness. Her new school was one of the best in Atlanta: clean hallways, high test scores, parent committees who wore matching tennis shoes and always had something to say. It was the kind of place where last names mattered. And skin color quietly did too. Landon had pulled every string to get her in. He thought, maybe, giving her the best education would protect her, maybe access would equal safety. But access doesn't always mean acceptance. It started small. Little girls whispering in the hallway. A teacher mispronouncing her name even after being corrected 5 times. Mothers at school pickup staring too long when Azariah showed up instead of Landon. Then came the incident. It was recess. Serafina had just scored a goal in a soccer scrimmage. Her teammates cheered until one boy, lanky and pale, walked up and muttered loud enough for others to hear, "Too bad your skin doesn't match your trophy." The laughter that followed was sharper than any insult. She didn't cry. Not right away. She waited until she got home, climbed into her mother's lap, and whispered, "Do I look wrong?" Azariah held her so tight she could barely breathe. "No, baby," she said. "You look like royalty." But even a mother's love has its limits when society plants seeds of shame. That night, Landon came home to find Serafina curled up on the couch, not watching TV, just staring at the blank screen. He sat beside her. "You okay, pumpkin?" She didn't answer at first. Then she said quietly, "Some kids think I don't belong there." Landon's heart dropped. He had hoped naively that the new school, the new zip code, the shiny school brochure full of inclusion quotes would be enough, but it wasn't. He looked at his daughter and said the one thing he wished someone had told him earlier in life. "You don't belong to them, you belong to you." She looked up. "People will always try to put you in a box," he continued. "Too black, too poor, too loud, too smart, but you don't fit in a box. You're a universe." That night, he and Azariah sat down with the principal. They didn't yell. They didn't threaten lawsuits. They simply laid out the truth. "Our daughter is not a charity case. She's not your diversity quota. She's not here to make you look good on paper. She's here to learn. And if your teachers and students can't see her value, then maybe this school isn't as excellent as your rankings say at Island." To their surprise, the principal listened. Maybe it was the calm in Landon's voice. Maybe it was the fire in Azariah's eyes. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the fact that someone finally stood up without backing down. The next week, the school introduced a new curriculum segment, Living Histories. Students were asked to share family stories, not just the pretty ones, but the real ones. Serafina stood in front of her class with her curls pulled back and a single photo in her hand. "This is my mom," she said. "She was a waitress. She raised me by herself, and she taught me that love is louder than hate." Then she held up another photo. "This is my dad. He used to be afraid of what people would think, but now he fights for me." Some kids clapped. Some stayed quiet. But no one laughed. That night, Serafina came home, dropped her backpack, and ran to Landon. "They clapped," she said. "They actually clapped." He scooped her up, spun her in the air. "Of course they did," he said. "You're unforgettable." The truth is changing. The world doesn't always happen in marches or courtrooms. Sometimes, it happens in second-grade classrooms, on schoolyard benches, in the soft defiance of a little girl who refuses to shrink. Serafina wasn't just surviving. She was shining. And the world was starting to notice. Margaret McCarter had spent her entire life surrounded by silence. The quiet of luxury, the hush of control, the comfortable stillness that comes when everything and everyone is exactly where you want them. But lately, silence had become unbearable. She no longer heard polite conversation in the house, no footsteps down the grand staircase, no Sunday phone calls from her son, just echoes. She was alone. After Landon's confrontation, after he left the DNA report on her garden table and walked away, Margaret sat in that silence for days. No more pretending, no more denying. Just the truth, hovering in every corner of her mansion like a draft she couldn't close out. She thought about her granddaughter, a girl she hadn't wanted, had tried to erase. A child who, against all odds, had found her way into Landon's heart and stayed there. One morning, Margaret pulled out an old photo album from her bedroom shelf, covered in leather, stitched with the McCarter family crest. Inside were perfectly posed pictures Landon in boarding school, her late husband shaking hands with senators, Christmas parties with carefully selected guests and even more carefully curated smiles. But none of it felt real anymore. None of it mattered. She closed the album and picked up the phone. The first time she called Azariah, it rang 5 times, then went to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. The second time, she texted, "I would like to see Serafina, if you'll let me." No emojis, no signatures, just words. Azariah didn't reply right away. And honestly, Margaret didn't expect her to. She had given the woman every reason to shut the door and lock it forever. But the next day, something miraculous happened. A reply. "Tomorrow, 4 p.m., at the park. Your son will be there too." Margaret stared at the screen, her perfectly manicured fingers hovering above the phone for several seconds. Then, for the first time in a long time, she felt nervous. She wore gray slacks, a soft cardigan, and low heels, not her usual pearls and posture outfit. No makeup, just moisturizer. And when she arrived at the park, she saw them before they saw her. Azariah, sitting on the bench. Landon, tossing a ball to Serafina, who giggled every time it rolled too far. Margaret took a deep breath, then walked toward them. Landon noticed her first. He didn't smile, but he didn't walk away either. Azariah gave a polite nod, firm, guarded, but not cold. And Serafina? She froze. Her eyes studied the older woman approaching her. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. Margaret knelt slowly, adjusting her jacket. "You must be Serafina," she said softly. The little girl said nothing. Margaret reached into her purse, not with the air of someone giving a gift to impress, but someone offering something fragile. It was a small leather-bound book, worn, hand-stitched, old. "This was your father's journal. He wrote in it when he was your age. I thought, maybe you'd like to add to it." Serafina reached out carefully, took the book, and opened it. The pages were filled with crooked handwriting, stick figure drawings, and early poems about spaceships and superheroes. She looked up at Margaret. "You kept it?" Margaret nodded. "I kept everything, even when I didn't know what I was doing." Landon crossed his arms, still silent, watching. Margaret turned to him. "I can't undo the things I've said, or the damage I caused, but I'm trying to learn how to be someone who deserves another chance." Landon didn't speak for a moment. Then, finally, "Start with her." Margaret turned back to Serafina. "I'd like to come back again, maybe bring cookies, if that's okay with your mom." Serafina looked at Azariah, who gave the tiniest nod. "Okay," the little girl whispered. And just like that, the silence broke. Not all at once, not into laughter, but into possibility. The idea came to Landon while watching Azariah help Serafina with her science project on the living room floor. They were surrounded by colored pencils, glitter, glue sticks, and construction paper, none of which seemed to stay on the table. Azariah was barefoot, in an old t-shirt and leggings, her hair up in a scarf. But the way she laughed, the way she encouraged Serafina with gentle, steady hands, it was the most powerful thing Landon had ever witnessed. It reminded him of who she was before the struggle, before being pushed aside, before being forgotten. A brilliant woman, a loving mother, a survivor. And that night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake thinking about all the other women like her, smart, capable, driven, but held back by circumstances they didn't create. He thought about waitresses, grocery store cashiers, daycare workers, women who kept the world spinning while the world barely noticed them. That's when he decided. The next morning, he scheduled a meeting with his board of directors at McCarter Holdings. It wasn't a normal agenda. He stood at the head of the long glass table, looking out at a dozen men and women in suits worth more than most people made in a month. "I'm starting a scholarship fund," he said, "in honor of Azariah Bell." Someone cleared their throat. "A scholarship? For what exactly?" "For single mothers," Landon said. "Specifically, women of color who've been marginalized or denied access to higher education. Women like Azariah who had the drive, the talent, and the heart, but not the opportunity." Another board member frowned. "This isn't a non-profit organization." "No," Landon replied. "But it's a company run by people. And I've made mistakes that I refuse to let become this company's legacy." They asked questions. They ran numbers. But Landon didn't flinch. He committed $10 million of his personal equity to seed the fund. He brought in diversity consultants, educational advocates, and financial advisors to ensure transparency. And he made one thing clear. This wasn't a PR stunt. It was a promise. 2 months later, in the very hotel ballroom where Margaret McCarter once held galas to keep up appearances, the scholarship was officially launched. The press came, the media covered it. But the most powerful part of the evening wasn't the headlines or the hashtags. It was Azariah. She stood on stage beside Landon, dressed in a flowing navy blue dress Serafina had picked out for her. Her hair was styled in soft curls, and when she stepped up to the microphone, the room fell silent. "I never thought my name would be on anything other than a paycheck," she began. "And I definitely didn't think it would be tied to something like this. But I'm standing here because someone believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself." She looked over at Landon. "Sometimes redemption doesn't look like an apology. It looks like action. And today, we're taking action for the women who deserve more than just survival. They deserve a future." The room erupted in applause. Later that night, after the cameras left and the lights dimmed, Landon and Azariah stood outside under the soft glow of the valet lamps. "I hope this makes up for the past," he said. Azariah shook her head. "It doesn't make up for it," she said. "It honors it. There's a difference." Landon nodded. Then Serafina ran up, holding one of the printed brochures from the event. Her tiny finger pointed to the top where it read, "The Azariah Bell Scholarship Fund, Empowering Single Mothers Through Education." "Is this really named after you?" she asked. Azariah knelt beside her. "Yes, baby, it island." "Does that mean you're famous?" Azariah smiled. "No," she said. "It means we're finally being seen." And in that moment, under the stars and beside the people who mattered most, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Free. Life doesn't always hand us fair beginnings. Some of us start from the outside looking in. Some carry names people mispronounce, skin tones people misjudge, or histories others try to erase. And too often, worth is measured by wealth, success, or status, by headlines and degrees, instead of heart and resilience. But this story, Azariah's story, is proof that real worth doesn't shout. It endures. It builds. It whispers to you when the world is too loud, reminding you who you are when others try to define you by what you're not. Azariah Bell was never supposed to be more than a statistic in someone else's narrative. A single black mother, a waitress, an afterthought in a billionaire's past. But she refused to let that be her ending. Instead, she became the kind of woman who didn't just survive, she transformed everything around her. She raised a daughter with kindness, discipline, and joy. She faced cruelty with grace. She taught a man who once walked away how to stand up for something greater than himself. And she reminded all of us of a truth that's easy to forget. Worth is not something you're given. It's something you carry. No title, no test, no wealth can measure what lives in the soul of someone who chooses to love anyway, who shows up, who forgives, who rebuilds. And Landon? He learned that redemption isn't a speech. It's not a headline. It's not a check. It's 1,000 small choices to do better, to listen harder, to love without needing to be praised for it, He learned that legacies don't start with foundations or stock options. They start in living rooms, hospital beds, playgrounds, apologies, and truth. As for Serafina, she didn't just get her dream of a family. She became the bridge between what was broken and what could be whole. Her voice, the innocence, the strength shifted the hearts of people twice her age. She reminded adults of the power of belief, of what can happen when we stop trying to look impressive and start being present. So what's the lesson here? It's simple. We all have hidden worth. In a world obsessed with surfaces, you have to look deeper, at yourself, at others, at the stories you think you know. Ask yourself, who have I written off before I really listened? Who have I failed to see in full color? And more importantly, have I forgotten to see my own value, just because someone else didn't? Because the truth is, your story matters. Whether you're raising a child on your own, rebuilding after betrayal, or trying to find your voice in a room that's never echoed your name, you matter. You don't need permission to take up space. You don't need validation to start again. And you definitely don't need perfection to be powerful. So as you finish watching this story, don't just walk away entertained. Walk away changed. Take the lessons. Start the conversation. And if someone in your life needs to hear this, share it. This is Hidden Worth, where we uncover the stories that the world overlooks and remind you that the quietest voices often carry the loudest truth. If this story moved you, even a little, drop a comment below. Let us know what part hit home, what part felt like your own story. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we tell the truth behind them.